All right, welcome to this installment of ContextTV. Joining me is Kurt Merriweather. How are you, sir? How are you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm excellent. I can't complain. I mean, there's a lot to complain about. I just choose not to. So, just to put it into context, Kurt, I'd love for you to tell us a little bit about your latest project. But just for the viewers, you and I met way back. I mean, 2010.
Yes.
I think you were at Discovery.
Mhm.
You had recently bought How Stuff Works, and I think Watch Mojo was a money losing but promising startup in the video space. And
Right.
I think we were connected through mutual associates, and we were exploring a possible partnership, and it didn't happen. But we then reconnected, I think, a few years ago at VidCon. It was in the press room,
That's right. That's exactly right. Yep.
and I say I'm the Forrest Gump of the industry because I'm just intermittently running into all these people. But then we started to chat last year in 2020, not just the pandemic, but there was obviously the Black Lives Matter protests that were going on.
Right.
And recently you shared something on LinkedIn. So I just wanted you to maybe give us a little bit of an update on yourself, your background, and what you're working on, and then we could dive into the topic of the day.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Kurt Merriweather. I've been in the media and technology space for 20 years plus. Have done a lot in the product world. So, started my career at Procter and Gamble. Decided I didn't want to. Not that anything's wrong with soap or toilet paper or other things like that, but didn't want to didn't want to manage those brands. Went to Silicon Valley, went to Stanford, worked for a few companies out on the West Coast, some startups, some larger companies that you may know if you go back through history. And went to the East Coast and worked for Discovery, where we met. Worked for AOL for a number of years, focusing on product and business development, and moved to the North Carolina area about 7 years ago, and was running product for a music technology startup. And that's where I bumped into you at VidCon when doing that. And for the last 4 years, I'd been at a marketing firm that's one of the fastest growing agencies called Walk West here in the North Carolina area. And we started to do some innovation and saw this opportunity related to diversity, equity, and inclusion. And what we started to see is that companies had opportunities to tap into new markets, to open up how they were thinking about marketing from a multicultural perspective. One of the things that we know about multicultural communities, especially in the technology space, is that different groups adopt technology faster than mainstream groups. And so there's an opportunity to learn something by what's happening with another group that's multicultural that you can then expand to the mainstream. And so thinking about what's getting adopted in a variety of different cultures gives you a leg up on other organizations that may not be thinking about that. And then the other thing we know that's happening is that the world is changing around us. And from a demographic perspective, the world is becoming more and more non-white, quite frankly. And so as organizations are looking to recruit, as they're looking for sustainability, as they're looking for succession planning, they need to be thinking about how they're going to bring talent into the organization so that that organization is sustainable. And then we have 5 different generations of the workforce at work right now, from the silent generation to Gen Z and all the generations in between. And so it's getting harder and harder to create teams that are high performing because teams are so diverse. And so we saw an opportunity to help organizations brand and market themselves more effectively and build teams more effectively through education. And that's where the business for the diversity movement, that's how it was birthed, is seeing that opportunity, realizing that this is one of the most important things that companies should be considering, is how they're going to build an organization that's going to be lasting and it's going to be built for the long term.
You touch on many points. I personally, born in Iran, grew up in Canada. I'm as Muslim as a BLT. I'm not. I wasn't brought up. I was brought up very Western and all that.
Right.
And really, it was after 9/11 that it kind of hit me that, oh, I'm a bit different. Like, in the census, Iranians are white, but I'm Western. But I was like, I get it. I'm a bit of an outsider. So, was there a moment, where it kind of maybe hit you, where you're like, wait a minute, it's not just that I don't want to sell soap. Nothing wrong with PG. It's not that Discovery's not a fine media company. Was there like a purpose? Was there a calling? Did something happen when you kind of realized, hey, I got to be on the side looking for a solution to this inequality? And even there is an inequality, or was it no, you knew it when you were a kid, you just finally got to a moment in your career where you had the confidence and the comfort to be like, hey, I'm going to pursue this?
That's a really good question. So even when I was at Procter and Gamble, and this has been a long time ago, Procter and Gamble had a Black employee group, and I was a leader in that group, just graduating from Ohio State. And so that's always been a passion to help uplift underrepresented people, and that started ever since I can remember. And so throughout my journey, I've been able to pick up a variety of different skills. And within the last few years, I started to reevaluate some things, to think about how can I take the things that I've learned, the experiences that I've had, to lift up underrepresented people, not just because that's the right thing to do, and it absolutely is, but because companies are missing innovation, they're missing access to different thinking that would help propel them and make them more successful. And so I had this moment in 2019 where I had a decision to make about what I was going to do next. And part of that decision-making process was, what can I do that's not only going to be in my wheelhouse, so to speak, as far as my skills go, but what can I do to make a difference in an area of passion that every day I wake up, it's more mission oriented in terms of what the business is focusing on. And that's the thing that kind of cemented everything for me, is being able to do that, so that there was, obviously there's opportunity to build a new company and a new business and a new platform, but it was the mission that attracted me more than anything else. And so that's the thing that excites me on a daily basis. And I've reached a point in my career where I want to do something that really matters. And so that's what I was thinking about when I was looking at those different Venn diagrams, being the technical person I am. How do they all overlap? And this is an opportunity to go do something that I thought was going to create a lasting impact for lots of different people and companies. So that's a good question. That's what was my motivation to do that.
You mentioned the different generations. Do you feel and see that, let's say, millennials and even Gen Y are maybe more colorblind? They're more, obviously diversity is good, or it's not really generational. Is there a bias that's more, let's say, whether it's regional, let's say it's class, let's say it's education? How do you break down like the science of prejudice, which sometimes is subtle, subconscious, sometimes it's overt and malicious, sometimes it's just upbringing,
Right.
so how do you break it down? What's the pyramid of priorities? How do we resolve for
Yeah.
this?
So one of the things that we say a lot in the team is that proximity breeds empathy. And so when you're used to spending time with lots of different people, then you expect to see that. And so when you think about millennials or Gen Z, their expectation of who they're working with is different because of how they were socialized, and they're more collaborative in general as a generation versus baby boomers, where you kind of went to work, you did your thing, you hung up your lunch pail, you went home, and there was this gulf between what you did for a living and where you lived. And so that's starting to change, is the expectation of culture and how culture is starting to combine a lot of different elements. And so there, these walls between work and home life have been broken down with younger generations. And so not even using the word colorblind, they're color conscious. One of the things that they want to be able to see is different representations of people that they're used to being around, and having that same thing be available as they work. And so that's one of the things that's starting to happen, that we're seeing as we're working with different companies and our partners who are in the talent management, talent advisory business. One of the things that's starting to happen is that when people are looking for a job, they're almost looking at the job as if they were shopping for a car or buying a house. They're going through that same level of thinking. They're doing that same level of research, going to your website, going to your LinkedIn profiles or Facebook or Instagram or now Clubhouse. So there are these different things that are starting to emerge. And people who want to work for organizations also want to know what that organization stands for, how they're donating proceeds and other things. And so these are the things that are in the minds of a lot of people in their interview process. And so that's how things are different, is the level of information, the level of research that is happening before someone ever has that first conversation about joining a company. Because it's not for them, especially for younger generations, it's not just about joining a company. It's, is my value system aligned with your value system as an organization? If it is, then I want to have an opportunity to participate in that. So the decision-making process is very different. And so that's one of the things that we're starting to see as we're helping companies thinking about how to attract the right people as they're looking to grow. So it's challenging for leaders who may be later in their careers where that mindset is completely different. So then how do you lead a team where when you have somebody who joins the company, not only expects to have a say in what happens, but they want to be at the decision-making table, having walked in the door, the day before. So it's a different mindset, and leaders have to be really competent in being able to manage those different ways that teams are thinking as they're coming into the door. So lots to cover there for sure.
I mean, like Watch Mojo is a very unique company. We're only 40, 50 full-time, and we have 100 plus freelancers. But like, I started the business with my wife. We still work together. She has not killed me. We hired three employees on day one, so to speak, who I viewed as the co-founders. It's the same five, and there's a core of 10. So I always go, well, there's no Black person on my executive team. I have a lot of advisors, who are people of color, and purposely because I'm drawn to people who overcome obstacles. And generally, if you're a minority, if you're LGBT, I mean, you have overcome obstacles, right? But I actually think like if you want to kind of start to expand and have more diversity, then it's like, well, do you go thoughtful, methodical, proactively go recruit somebody? And then is it like you're seeming to the rest of the team that my next question is like, today we hear of cancel culture. And when I was growing up, that was kind of political correctness. Today we talk about diversity and inclusion. To the critics that go, well, that's just affirmative action, which growing up, that's what's like the lexicon. First of all, are your thoughts on affirmative action that's net positive? Like, where's the problem with that? Or are you like, no, diversity and inclusion initiatives are different than affirmative action because why? What are your thoughts?
Well, affirmative action was really this beginnings. If you think about compliance in doing things to change the composition of companies, that's where diversity, equity, and inclusion practices started from. And the issue with thinking about it that way is a lot of times that was very quota driven. So if you hit your number, then you're finished. Well, just because your composition is different doesn't mean anything about your team has changed. And so the mistake that a lot of organizations make is they're thinking about quota instead of thinking about, if I hire somebody, how are they going to change the not only the makeup of my team. Oh, sorry about that. My screen just spontaneously disappeared.
They've taken over.
Hopefully we could fix that in post. Not only thinking about the composition of the team, but if I hire somebody, what are they going to add to the team? And then and how are we different? How are they different as a result of us coming together? So it has to be much more intentional. There are these things where, for example, in order to take a company public, Goldman Sachs came out and the state of California has said they have to have a diverse member of the board. Well, what are they going to do? Why? And so the mistake that a lot of people make in their thinking is that if I have a quota-based system, that somehow I'm changing my standard in order to make that happen. That's not the right way to think about it. The way to think about it is, if I need a certain kind of person who's got access to certain kinds of thinking with access to different networks, then my decision-making is going to be better. And there's studies that show that the more diverse your team is, the faster you make decisions because you have access to more information. And so companies should be thinking about that question differently. So it's not just about, should I have somebody Black on my team? And I think, yes, you should, but why? And it's because of the network that they have access to. It's the information they have access to. So there's this theory called the strength of weak ties that a psychologist at Stanford, Mark Merriweather, came across. And the idea is that if you and I have a conversation and we're not operating in the same social circles, we're going to exchange more information in a shorter period of time, because when we talk together, our networks are so disparate and our information is disparate. And that's what organizations should be thinking about, is how do I connect these different kinds of people with different experiences so that ultimately my decision-making processes are better, the data I have access to is better. So then if I'm a product-based company, then my innovation should be better. I should be able to open myself up to new markets. So, so it's not really about affirmative action or quota-based thinking as much as it is, how can I be intentional so that if I want to hire somebody, who haven't I thought of or considered that I should be considering, and that may change my whole search or thought process in terms of thinking about who to bring in.
So, you talk about ultimately communication. And so, there's 4 C's in my mind. There's culture, but culture is a function of your communication. How do you address things? How do you resolve things? But once you start to communicate, then you lead into conflict, and then ultimately you got to compromise as a team.
Right.
So at the company, I'm very driven, but I actually kind of, because I have a lot of power, admittedly, as like the founder, let's say as a shareholder, as the CEO, I can also, because I believe fundamentally that diversity leads to better discussion and better decision making. But I can basically open up the floor and get people who are going to be different. And there's somewhat of a pain sometimes, but I'm a masochist. So to me, it's a positive. But in so many boardrooms, executives don't really want that. They want people who kind of are yes people and they kind of share, because they will be undermined, right? Like if somebody
Right.
disagrees, you eventually, like, if you can't convince them, probably you're wrong. But if you have full power, you could overrule them. So how much of it is because maybe, not to get too philosophical, but how much of it because maybe human beings actually don't want that, forget diversity in terms of skin color, but they don't actually want diversity of opinion. They actually don't want different perspectives. So, maybe it's just that. I just want your thoughts, like fundamentally going into it, how much of a challenge is just getting people to embrace just different opinions?
Yeah, that's a significant challenge. And so that gets at the heart of unconscious biases that we have. And one of the ones that, as we work with different clients that we see and different customers is affinity bias. So we like hanging out with people who are like ourselves. That's one of the natural biases that we have. And when you're building a team that's diverse, there's research that shows that that team underperforms a homogeneous team when in the formation stages. And so that's why a lot of people say, let's do these things. It's going to be great. We're going to have this diverse team. They're going to be awesome. And then it's difficult because you don't have the common language. You don't have a common way of thinking. And so it takes longer to get things done. The key is to press past that, because then what you find is that a heterogeneous team is going to outperform the homogeneous team once you get to a point where you've passed the formation stage. And so a lot of organizations don't have the patience. They don't have your mindset, as you were just talking about, like it's okay if it's hard. A lot of people are dealing with, like, running a business is difficult. And so are you willing to put the effort and energy in to forming a new team that's different, because it's challenging? And so that's one of the reasons that, from our perspective, you might need outside help in doing that. Just like doing anything that's hard, we have a set of tools and resources and education that we help organizations with to get through that phase of, oh my gosh, we tried something, it didn't work, and so what do we do now? And I think that's the challenge that a lot of leaders have, is they don't have experience thinking about team formation like this. And so as a result of that, they either say, well, yeah, I'm fine. We're going to find diverse people in the same places that we look for everybody else, which is something that you see a lot of. Or say that, are just, we're fine. We don't have any challenges with the business. We're not going to see any benefits from doing this. But what we'll do is we'll make sure that if you look at the organization overall, that we've got diversity across the organization, but not necessarily take that to the leadership positions where that's where the true power is in terms of thinking differently. But it's a challenge because it requires leaders to challenge their biases that they may have. And so if you're comfortable enough, and I was reading a really good article about this, not tied to diversity, equity, inclusion specifically, but if you're a leader who says, I came to this conclusion, I need to find somebody who's going to prove me wrong so I can make a better decision, that's the kind of thought process that you need to have as a leader to be successful. But a lot of leaders don't want to have their decision making challenged that way. And so then you end up finding people who by and large think the same way that you do. That way you feel good about the decision you're making, but that conflict that you're not experiencing isn't present, so then you're not really making the best decisions that you could.
Yeah, I mean, I'll sometimes again go around being like, hey, like any opposite point of view, going once, going twice, because I'm like, somebody must have a different point of view.
Right.
It doesn't mean we'll go, but let's just discuss it. But again, I go back to, I have this privilege that through hard work and sacrifice, I kind of, if somebody really undermines me, if there's insubordination, like I can kind of be like, whoa, this is getting out of hand. Whereas I understand when I put myself in a normal executive shoes, I don't just automatically go, oh, they're racist. I give them the benefit of the doubt until they show their racist ways. But I'm like, hey, maybe it's just because they feel like it's hard enough to implement their plan, which takes me to the next, over the course of the US elections, I remember watching Abby Phillip on CNN. And what I thought of is I just quickly Googled because I wanted to kind of find some images to be like, hey, last time there was an election, what was happening? And on ContextTV, which is the companion blog to this channel, I kind of wrote an article then, which was diversity and inclusion. Are you willing to give up your seat? What I mean is, to be fair, like what's kind of cool about CNN is they did, on the one hand, give this opportunity to a very talented person. But when you go back 4 years before, the person that was on that third seat was effectively, let's say, a white correspondent, right? So what is the trade-off? Like, how do you actually pull that off? Is it like, is the expectation that as somebody from a privileged group, is the hope that that person sometimes recognizes that, the same way you open the door for somebody to go first, it's polite, it's etiquette, it's courtesy, it's also karma. Is the expectation, do you think, or the solution ideally driven more by empathy of peers? Or do you really think that, no, that's wishful thinking, nobody's going to give up the chair, so to speak. It's got to come from management, which means making some seemingly unpopular decisions, but just that's the way to go. So the question basically is this something that really you need allies, like a manager helping a manager, maybe referring a candidate, a person of color? Or do you think that's wishful thinking, we'll take that as a bonus, but really to drive change, it's got to come top down, from manager opening the door to, let's say, somebody that would report to them?
Well, I would say if it worked bottoms up, then things would be different, and they're not. So I think that like waiting for the lower grassroots movement to change things at the top has proven not to work. So you need leaders who are looking far enough down the road to say, and to use the CNN example, and just kind of to think about that for a minute, what additional audiences am I going to open myself up to because Abby Phillip is a correspondent? And how do I grow my base? How do we do that so that over time, I've got more and more people watching because I can identify with one of the people who happens to be part of the broadcast. And so that's one of the things that hopefully if you're programming a network or you're running a company, you're thinking about what additional thinking can I get, but what additional customers can I access because they're people that I have on my team that a larger customer set can identify with. And then also when I hire talent, if that person who happens to be of a different group sees someone who's like themselves, and this could be age, it could be, and the other thing as we think about diversity, it's not just about race, it's about diversity across lots of different dimensions. And so when you think about experience, whether it's geographic or sexual orientation or where you went to school, all those different things, if you have a mix of that, then you've got other people saying, well, that's possible because their background looks like this, but this background looks like that. So there's not this profile that you need to have that's unachievable as you're trying to rise up through an organization. And so that's something a leader needs to pay attention to. Am I going to attract the people that we need, or do I need a team around me to attract the company that we need to build, to reach the customers we need to build? And am I willing to give up power at the table to build a bigger company, because together we're stronger? And so that requires a different kind of leadership. That's an inclusive leadership style. And that's a different style than we've seen, historically with other leaders, where you look at, whether it was Steve Jobs or others who had a very clear vision of what they were building, and they weren't necessarily team oriented. And I think what we're starting to see, and I actually did a podcast with Jeffrey Moore in October, and we talked a little bit about how companies are changing from a product development point of view. And the thing that he had mentioned was that product development has shifted. So it's not so much about the product anymore. It's not just about the iPhone. It's about, how am I building collaborative experiences with my customers so that I can win? So things are more about building ecosystems, more about building communities. And because that's shifting, it's because it's more collaboratively driven, then you need to have people around you who are in different communities that can help you understand what you're trying to build. And so that's the thing that we're seeing right now. So we're in the middle of this transition in a lot of companies. And so this is a really exciting time to be doing what we're doing, because I can see how the work that we're doing is going to help companies, cross that chasm, so to speak, or make that change.
So I'd love a couple more questions if you have time. I know.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, I mean, how much of this do you think, to address socioeconomic inequality, like I think there's a lot of layers, I think ultimately it does come to equity, ownership. The more Black, LGBT women are owners of businesses, or own stakes in businesses, I think
Right.
that's long term where they will also give back, right? But not everybody's entrepreneurial, so you also can't just give money away
Sure.
for a business. So
Right.
So I want to get your thoughts on how much of it is basically that, the entrepreneurship business owner route, and how much of it is really, so let's say the equity part, and which has a double meaning, and then how much of it is more diversity and inclusion in terms of employees and employment and jobs. Like, do you think long term, to solve this, there's an equation and you want to put weights? How much of it is ownership? How much of it is just more equity amongst employment?
Right. That's a good question. So I don't know that I have the formula yet, so I don't know what the balance should be, but I'll start with the entrepreneurial question. So if you think about, as we're coming out of COVID, anytime there's a recession, small and medium-sized businesses usually lead the economy out of those downturns, and company formation tends to be in underrepresented communities. So you've got companies that have been built at the bottom that have figured a way to get out. And so if I was investing, I would be thinking about, well, if you survived a pandemic, you can probably build a company when you've got a tailwind and you're doing a little bit better. And so I think it's about finding those companies and then changing the thought process around how to do that. So we last week had a panel that talked about transforming private equity and venture capital through DEI, and we had a few people join us for that. And one of the things that we were talking about is the importance of being intentional and tapping into different networks, and not falling into the trap around thinking about certain kinds of businesses as lifestyle businesses. So a lot of times you hear, this is a business from the African American community or the Latinx community, and you think of it's a lifestyle business. Well, that's probably not true. And so how do you dispel those myths? Well, one of the ways you do that is trying to create these connections between folks who have access, who have capital, and then folks who haven't historically had access to capital, so that there's more discussions happening among those groups. So that's the first thing, is building those bridges and recognizing that companies that are innovative enough to stay afloat amidst the things that were happening are probably worth investing in, or investigating at the very least, and then working with those organizations to help them build capacity so that they could grow. So that's the first side of that. The second side, or the other side, the flip side that you were talking about is, well, what does this mean for employees? And so then I think there's, leadership opportunities within corporations, and part of what organizations should be thinking about is succession planning. And what we find in terms of things that work inside an organization are things that aren't quote unquote diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives. They're just development initiatives. So why don't we start a mentoring program and find high potential talent in our organization? The thing that's different is my idea of who high potential is needs to shift, right? So who can I invest in? Who can I champion? Who can I sponsor so that I'm spending enough time with folks who fit that performance profile, that I can make sure that they get the access to opportunities and assignments and networks that they need in order to progress through the organization. So there's that piece of it. And then there's, on the recruiting side, where am I looking for people? Am I looking for people in the same places, or am I thinking about, looking at historically Black colleges and universities? Am I looking at different associations that I may not know existed before? Looking at different geographies that I may not have considered before for talent, or looking at a different profile where I'm not looking at somebody who went to Stanford, but I'm looking at somebody who went to a university that's not as well known. And so those are some of the things that I think, in terms of organizations thinking about how to recruit, make sure that that talent is being nurtured, and then having a culture inside the organization where there's a sense of belonging, so the teams want to stay no matter what groups they belong to. So there's, how do you start companies and give founders the right access to capital so that they can build great companies and hopefully have some exits and change the communities that they live in? And then also for companies to give a wide array of folks the opportunities to progress through the organization. So I think both of those things have to happen. But in terms of percentages, I'm not sure. We'll call it 50-50 right now.
I moneyball everything. Everything is moneyball to me. No. So tell me a little bit. I mean, thank you for your time. I mean, just the diversity movement. Like, what are you looking for? Ideally, like, are you looking for companies to reach out to you? Are you looking for expert? Like, tell us a little bit about what's the wish list in 2021.
Yeah, the wish list for us is for people to know who we are and what we're doing, and our approach is different. So a lot of times people think about diversity, equity, and inclusion. They think about training. They think about workshops. We're building a platform that we believe is going to fundamentally change education, so that not only can we help organizations identify what their challenges are, but we can help educate that organization at scale. From having an e-learning course, which is an online course, we have a mobile app that allows that same education to be accessible through a set of custom actions that if you're in a challenge and you want to know more about a culture in terms of foods that different cultures eat, to get more empathy, to understand that culture a little bit better, watching videos, reading books, working together as an organization to understand each other, especially when we're separated. That's another area that we focus on. And then finally, we're building a learning platform or a set of learning experiences that'll be tailored to each individual business unit, so that no matter where you are on the continuum, we're going to help put together a learning path that's going to be successful with analytics attached to that, so that organizations can then track and benchmark how different organizations and different individuals and their teams are progressing. So we want to build this end-to-end learning experience and platform. And that's the thing that we're doing that we think is novel. And so in our team, we've got entrepreneurs and DEI experts and storytellers all under one roof. And so our ability to help organizations not only understand where they are, but then to transform themselves through a narrative, because ultimately, when you're trying to get an organization to change, it's about storytelling. How do you convince somebody that they should adopt a new way of thinking? And it's about telling the right stories, and that those stories are told with data. They're also told through content. They're also told through conversations. And so we want to make sure that we've combined all those different things to provide, compelling experiences. So what we need: awareness, Secondly, access to clients that want to do something different in terms of what we want to deploy. And then we're also looking to raise money at this point. And so we're looking for the right kinds of investors who believe in our story.
Okay. I have a bunch of ideas for you. I'll send them separately. I mean, really, I'm an open book, but just so I don't inundate you. But I do think there's a lot there. My final question, you've been very generous with your time. It's a bit contrarian, right? Does the Biden administration's win actually help or hurt your cause? And I'll explain why. On the surface, you would assume it's great. You have an ally in the White House. But at the same time, I think a lot of people, and not to get political, maybe you're president of the Donald Trump fan club, who knows? But a lot of people, I think when they would see what was, in my opinion, the meanness of the mean-spirited nature of the Donald Trump regime, normal people did want to contribute. So they would either just open their checkbook or they would place a call, like, or maybe they would go a bit out of their way to give an opportunity to somebody that was overlooked. Right. And now that it's, a friendly president in the office, they're like, yeah, life is good, back to business. So does President Biden actually help you guys or hurt you in some ways?
That's a really interesting point, because I've actually thought about the same thing. So clearly there's not an executive order that's outlawed diversity training. So that's helpful that executive order doesn't exist, right? So that opens up the opportunity to work with the government. So that's a boon for us. To your point though, the danger that a lot of people don't often think about is, well, now we can relax. Now we can kind of say it's just going to happen. And then complacency can set in, and then you don't have the change that you want to see. And so that's the danger, is that one of the upsides, if there is one, of what happened last summer is that there was a lot of grassroots movement and energy to do something, because the alternative was unacceptable to a lot of people, and they knew they needed to do something, and then they worked together to accomplish a goal, which was to change the outcome of the election. So that same energy may not exist. And so that's the thing that, as I think about the future, we need to make sure that we continue the momentum. And part of that, I hope, happens because there are people watching in ways that they weren't watching before. So I know of a nonprofit that's literally looking at the statements that companies put out to then say, did you make the changes you said you were going to make? And so there's, I think, going to be the emergence of watchdog organizations. They're going to be looking at the statements that companies have been making. And so that is something that I'm heartened by, is that there should be some different structures that hold companies accountable for what they said they were going to do. And so we'll see. I think it's not clear what's going to happen because there's still a lot of uncertainty. There's still a lot of things that are in flux. But on one hand, to your earlier point, we don't have this executive order that we have to worry about, but now we have to deal with thinking the battle may be finished when it's just getting started. So that would be the thing that I would be concerned about there.
Yeah, last year during the Black Lives Matters protests, a couple of my colleagues who were white, and they said, hey, how do you feel if we say this or that on? I said, I support it personally, but I was like, I'm going to challenge you that we have to also back it up, both through our editorial. And if we said something years ago when times were different, and again, we cover Batman, we're not political per se, but I said also going forward, I was like, look, I'm again the Iranian-born Muslim Canadian immigrant who hired all you guys. I've felt some prejudice, not what Black people go through, not what Jewish people go through, not what women go through, but I was like, I really, really hope you guys, it's not just empty words, because a lot of you have this privilege and others don't, right? So I agree with what you said about the corporations. You got to follow through. And then the final point I want to make is, I also think at the board level, it's so critical in the room, when it's private, whether it's board or decision making. I've started to make some investments, and I don't want to give too much away, and I'm not saying this for credit. It's more because I want to encourage others in the room to speak up. It was like an accelerator style of a vehicle. And there was a bunch of jobs, a bunch of companies applying. And frankly, let's say there were 20. The top 5, awesome. The bottom 10, the bottom 5, still not there. The middle 10 were interchangeable. meaning like number 11 and 8 were, you could
Yeah.
swap, 14. And there was one group, one company that applied from Africa. And they were in that kind of like, let's say 6 to 14. And so I was like, those silence. They were going to be kind of like relegated, not to move to the next round and interview. And I was like, if we're really saying that these companies are interchangeable, I was like, let them advance, give them that opportunity for the exposure, for the experience. If they don't make it on merit at that round, that's fair. It's competition, it's all good. But I just felt like we're in this room, we've been talking, we're all somewhat diverse in this room. We've been talking about these things. Now that we have the opportunity to actually make a little bit of an impact, to just give somebody a bit more experience, I'm like, really, nobody's going to actually step up. And then I said something and a bunch of people said something, but I was like, how many other rooms are there where there's just silence, And so I just feel like the work is so cut out, but it's a great initiative. I know we chatted about it last year when it came up on my LinkedIn. It was late at night, but I just said, hey, let's do this and record it. So look, I'd love to stay in touch, and I'll obviously got a bunch of ideas that I'll email you separately. But anytime you want to come back and tell us, the good, bad, and the ugly, what's working, what's not, what surprises you. I mean, this is not a one-off thing. I think this is almost like a calling, and it's fantastic, the effort, and hopefully the results are there.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for having me on, and look forward to giving you updates as we progress, because we're certainly on a journey that's not going to stop anytime soon. So looking forward to updating on what we're doing.
I'm going to send you so many ideas that you're going to be putting me on like the do not bother list. All right.
Well, you got to be careful. That might give you extra work to do. So
I love it. I'm here to serve. All right. Thank you very much for your time.
All right. Thanks.
Take care. Cheers.
See you.